Hey, listener, welcome to a special episode of the Northern Sentinels podcast shorts. Today I've got Mark Gasparotto on the short, and we are going to talk about something called the paddle for resilience. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thanks very much for having me.
So let's just start with the most obvious question. What is the paddle for resilience?
So, Chris, really big picture, there's two components. There's something called the paddle for resilience, which is open to any paddler, anywhere in the world. And then there's something specifically that we're doing this year called the Ottawa River Expedition 2025, which the Gasparotto Group team will conduct as our contribution to the paddle for resilience. And my hope is the paddle for resilience becomes an annual event in support of Wounded Warriors Canada, much like their other do-it-yourself events, for example, the Ride for Mental Health, a Ruck for Remembrance, and something they call Walk for the Wounded. And so this year, the dates are set, 18 August to 20 September. My expedition team will embark on a 1,000-kilometer canoe expedition from the headwaters of the Ottawa River, which is Lac des Outaouais in Quebec, back to the nation's capital. And really, it's going to be a physical and mental endurance test, and that's the point. I think I was telling you at one of our suppers, we did a reconnaissance last year close to the headwaters, starting at the first set of rapids, and it took us 2 days to get 31 kilometers because there were so many rapids that were too dangerous for us to navigate. And that forced many portages through the bush where there were no paths or roads. So we literally had to cut our way through. So the first leg of this trip is super remote and rugged, and it's going to be a very hard go. And so this trip really embodies the resilience we promote in our leadership and team building programs, which also dovetails quite nicely into the work that Wounded Warriors Canada does. So this journey is just not about Gasparotto Group paddlers. It's an opportunity to raise significant funds for Wounded Warriors Canada, specifically supporting building upstream resilience and recovery initiatives.
What inspired you to do this, to take this on? I mean, what was the motivation? Because you've certainly done a ton of hard things in your life already. So why do this?
Well, there are many reasons, and I've already touched on one of them. And, as you know, and anyone else who's listening that knows me personally, often you need to follow the bouncing balls to fully understand why I do anything. So I'll list off a few of the reasons why. So number one, I'm an avid outdoor enthusiast, and I love to canoe in the backcountry. It can be hard, but it's also extremely beautiful. My cousin Peter Saponis, I'm not sure if you've ever met him. He's a former Canadian Armed Forces medical officer. He's also part of the expedition team. And he put the idea of paddling the entire Ottawa River into my head a few years back. Number three, I want to write another book, this one on resilience specifically, and it's to complement the work I do in the leadership development arena. And I've got a keynote and a workshop called Struggle Well, Experiments with Resilience. And part of building resilience is doing hard things. And I think, this expedition qualifies. And number four, and connected to the book, I need a new story, as I don't want to keep relying solely on my time in Kandahar as a combat commander. I keep going back to that well, and for very good reason. And there's a lot of lessons that I continue to employ from that time. But I really do want to update a story that is accessible, that people can relate to. And number five, and lastly, connected to Wounded Warriors Canada, it's an opportunity to start fundraising for a charity that I believe in a very Canadian way, by canoeing an historical route. So, all of those inputs over time have contributed to this idea and the planning and the eventual execution of this expedition.
Now, assuming that your description of the first leg and cutting your own way hasn't scared people off, how does someone participate in this? So is there room left in the actual your team? How do they do it? Sort of if they're not part of the Ottawa River piece, and then, hey, if it's like me who's not going to get into a boat, I mean, how do you support
Right.
this endeavor?
Um, so there's three ways to support, and as I go through them, I'll answer some of the initial parts of that question. So number one, there's corporate sponsorship of the expedition, and we've mostly got that locked down with Gasparotto Group clients and people in our network, but we're always open to having other conversations around that. Number two, so someone like you who doesn't want to get into a boat, there are charitable donations through Wounded Warriors Canada in support of the Gasparotto Group team. And number three, for those people who do like to paddle, but perhaps don't really envy a 5-week, 1,000-kilometer trek with a lot of very tough portages, you can embark on a do-it-yourself trip as part of Paddle for Resilience, and you can raise charitable donations that way via the Wounded Warriors Canada online donation site. So very much that third part that I just talked about is what the Ride for Mental Health is like, right? You go out and you ride a certain distance on a day of your choosing, raise money that way, and then it removes all the logistics required to organize something centrally. So I'm really trying to mimic what exists in other areas like bikes and runs and ruck marches, but on the paddling side. And we've created a club in Strava, so we can create a sense of community for anyone who's part of the Paddle for Resilience. Now, both of the URLs for both my website and Wounded Warriors, they're quite long and not necessarily intuitive. So perhaps you can put those in the in the notes section. But really, if you did a search of Paddle for Resilience, probably in quotation marks, these things would come up. And the last thing I'll say about how you could support, if you live in the National Capital Region, you can come and greet the expedition team at the finish line, which is at Westboro Beach in Ottawa on Saturday, the 20th of September. Now, the time's being confirmed we got to do a reconnaissance from our last staging point to the beach, but we think it's going to be between 10 and 11 a.m. And we've invited all sorts of folks. Wounded Warrior Canada's leadership. We've invited the Deputy Mayor, Dave Hill, who's a veteran. Murray Brewster from the CBC, who has been so kind to cover the expedition from a media perspective. Any Ottawa-based sponsors will be there, and there are several friends and family. And I think certainly after that, celebratory welcoming, it'll be time to go home and take a long bath and shower, maybe a couple of them to get all the dirt out. I'll have a 5-week beard, so I'll get that shaved off, get a haircut, and it'd be pretty good to sleep in a real bed.
That sounds like a great way to wrap it up. Now, you've mentioned Wounded Warriors a couple times, Mark.
Yeah.
For those who are listening who don't have a good sense of the organization, can you maybe give us an idea of their purpose and maybe some of the programs or the reasons why you wanted to focus the fundraising efforts in that direction?
Sure. Quite happy to. And I've pulled a lot of this right from their website. So Wounded Warriors Canada is a national mental health service provider, and they're dedicated to serving what they call trauma-exposed organizations, professionals, and their families. So I was not familiar with this term, trauma-exposed, but it's meant to be a broad, inclusive term that includes folks like or folks in the military, veterans, first responders, public safety personnel, correction staff, dispatchers, amongst others. So essentially, it's anyone that experiences trauma as part of their normal and daily professional life. And Wounded Warriors Canada specializes in providing culturally informed services that utilize a combination of education, counseling, and training to support both resilience, so that would be before the trauma happens, and then recovery from traumatic injuries. So that's what Wounded Warriors Canada does currently.
Now, there's a number of organizations in Canada that have sort of similar mandates. What compelled you to pick Wounded Warriors? Do you have a specific connection to them?
Yeah, I do. So quite interestingly, and even the current leadership was not aware of my connection to Wounded Warriors Canada, which really goes back to the charity's origin story. And initially, it was called the Sapper Mike McTeague Wounded Warriors Fund. And Mike was a member of my squadron in Kandahar, and he was seriously injured by a suicide bomber on 18 September 2006. I remember that day quite clearly. He was subsequently medically evacuated to Landstuhl, Germany, where NATO has a hospital at a U.S. base. And Mike's his prognosis was bleak, and so his parents, along with an assisting officer, were flown over. And miraculously, Mike survived his injuries and has made an incredible recovery. However, while he was at Landstuhl, and the care was excellent, the medical care was excellent, but there were few amenities for Canadian soldiers recuperating there. So they didn't have civilian clothes to wear. And there were no books, video games, etc. And so initially, that fund was set up to address that need. And since then, the charity's transformed into a national organization focusing on mental health and resilience. And obviously, it's changed its name to be, have a broader appeal and be more inclusive. And so, as you know, upon my return from Kandahar, I co-wrote a book with many members of my squadron called Clearing the Way, Combat Engineers in Kandahar. And half of the proceeds from the sale of that book were donated to the Wounded Warrior Fund. So really, this canoe expedition brings all of this home and full circle. It packages many symbiotically beneficial outcomes for me personally, my team, my business, charity, and the community. And quite fortunately, I've got the time, the resources, the experience, and the health to be able to do it. And I think that sums up the who, what, where, when, and why of the Ottawa River Expedition 2025 Paddle for Resilience.
Amazing. Mark, this has been a great overview and such a cool initiative for a whole bunch of reasons. And so if you're interested in supporting, you can go to, and I'll put the links into the notes here. So whether that be Wounded Warriors or Gasparotto Group, for the information. Dates again, 18 August to, you say 26 September or 20 September?
20 September. It's a Saturday, and we picked it very specifically to be a Saturday. So we've put some flex into the program. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to tell people an exact time that we're arriving for a 1,000-kilometer canoe trip. And that's really just to get as many people out as possible at the finish line to make it, a celebratory event. We'll be able to tally up all the money that was raised for Wounded Warriors Canada, and just finish it off with a great sense of community. And that's the beautiful thing about something like this. Everyone wins, right? Everyone has an opportunity to contribute and to do something meaningful. And I hope we'll be able to start something that can continue in the years to come.
Amazing. So listener, Mark Gasparotto, Garparotto Group, the Paddle for Resilience in support of Wounded Warrior. You have a chance to support in a variety of ways, as Mark has just outlined, and least of which you can go and welcome them home, join the party, 20th September at Westboro Beach in Ottawa, and I have no doubt it'll be fun to watch the team roll back into Ottawa after a 1,000-kilometer paddle. Mark, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for this initiative and sharing with listeners.
Chris, I appreciate you giving the opportunity to let people know about this.